A tiny wooden instrument, 4 strings, small enough to carry under one arm, simple enough to learn in a weekend, and yet powerful enough to travel across oceans, survive colonization, transform popular music, disappear almost entirely, and then come roaring back in the age of YouTube. This is the story of the ukulele, and the strangest part? It wasn't even born in Hawaii. The ukulele's story begins not on a beach in Waikiki, but in a crowded 19th century harbor in Portugal. In 1879, a ship called the SS Ravenscrag arrived in Honolulu carrying over 400 Portuguese immigrants from Madeira. They weren't just laborers hired to work sugar plantations. Among them were skilled craftsmen and musicians. One of those men, João Fernandes, reportedly jumped off the ship and began playing a guitar-like instrument as he walked the docks. The Hawaiians who gathered around were fascinated. The instrument was fast, bright, rhythmic. Their fingers moved so quickly across the strings that locals called it ukulele. There's debate about the exact translation, but the most popular meaning is jumping flea, not because it looked like one, but because the player's fingers moved like one. That tiny moment, a dockside performance by an immigrant musician, would spark one of the most unexpected cultural adoptions in music history. Because what happened next wasn't simple imitation. It was transformation. The instrument Fernandes played was likely a machete, a small Portuguese braguinha or cavaquinho. It had 4 strings. It was portable, it was rhythmic, but in Hawaii it evolved. Hawaiian craftsmen began building their own versions. They used native woods, they adjusted body shapes, they refined tuning. And within a generation, the instrument had become fully Hawaiian in identity, even if it was Portuguese in origin. By the 1880s, the ukulele had already caught the attention of Hawaiian royalty. King Kalakaua, often called the Merry Monarch, loved music. He supported traditional Hawaiian arts during a time when Western influence was rapidly reshaping the islands. And he embraced the ukulele. He invited musicians to perform at royal gatherings. He incorporated it into court entertainment. He helped elevate it from dockside curiosity to symbol of Hawaiian cultural pride. That endorsement changed everything, because once royalty adopts something, it spreads. The ukulele began appearing in Hawaiian celebrations, in hula accompaniment, in community gatherings, in homes. It was affordable, portable, and unlike larger string instruments, it didn't intimidate beginners. The tuning system, typically G, C, E, A, allowed for bright, cheerful chords. Its small size meant even children could play it. But here's what makes the ukulele's story fascinating. At first, it wasn't meant to dominate. It wasn't seen as prestigious like the violin. It wasn't complex like the piano. It wasn't booming like the guitar. It was simple. And simplicity, in the right cultural moment, becomes unstoppable. By the early 1900s, Hawaii itself was changing dramatically. In 1898, the United States annexed Hawaii. Suddenly, Hawaiian culture became an exotic fascination for mainland America. Tourism grew. Postcards circulated, and Hawaiian music began traveling outward. Then came 1915, the Panama Pacific International Exposition in San Francisco. Hawaiian musicians performed daily. They brought steel guitars, they brought hula dancers, and they brought the ukulele. The mainland audience had never seen anything like it. It looked friendly, it sounded joyful, it felt accessible. Sheet music sales exploded. Within a few years, the ukulele became a national craze. Factories in the United States began mass-producing them. Companies like Martin, already established guitar makers, entered the ukulele market. Between 1915 and the 1920s, the ukulele craze swept America. Middle-class households bought them in huge numbers. College students played them. Vaudeville performers incorporated them into comedy acts. The instrument became associated with lightness, charm, and modern leisure. But here's the paradox. The ukulele had traveled from Portugal to Hawaii, from Hawaii to mainland America, and yet each culture reshaped it differently. In Portugal, it was a folk rhythm instrument. In Hawaii, it became tied to cultural identity and hula. In America, it became fashionable and playful. Same instrument, different meaning. That adaptability would define its entire history, because the ukulele would not just rise once. It would rise, fall, disappear, reinvent, resurge, and eventually become one of the most viral instruments in internet history. But before it conquered YouTube, before it became a classroom staple, before it returned in indie folk and pop culture, it had to survive its first collapse, and that collapse came fast. The Great Depression was coming. The music industry was changing, the guitar was getting louder, and the tiny, jumping flea would soon find itself nearly forgotten. But that's only the beginning, because the ukulele's survival story is just as powerful as its origin. Now imagine the year is 1915. San Francisco is hosting one of the biggest international events of the era, the Panama Pacific International Exposition. It's meant to celebrate the completion of the Panama Canal. Nations and territories are showcasing culture, industry, art, and technology. And tucked inside that massive exhibition is a Hawaiian pavilion. At this point, Hawaii has already been annexed by the United States for nearly 2 decades. For many Americans on the mainland, Hawaii is exotic, distant, romantic, a place of palm trees and ocean breezes. Few have ever been there, but at this exposition, they don't just see Hawaii, they hear it. Hawaiian musicians perform daily. Steel guitars glide between notes in ways unfamiliar to American ears. Hula dancers move with controlled grace, and accompanying them is that small, bright, rhythmic instrument, the ukulele. Crowds gather. They don't just clap politely. They linger. They return. They talk about it. Newspapers begin mentioning Hawaiian music specifically. Sheet music publishers sense opportunity almost immediately. Tin Pan Alley composers start writing Hawaiian-themed songs, even if they've never stepped foot on the islands. The mainland becomes obsessed. This is the first great ukulele boom. Between 1915 and the early 1920s, sales skyrocket. Companies like C.F. Martin and Company, already respected guitar manufacturers, begin producing ukuleles at scale. Smaller companies jump in. Affordable student models appear in catalogs. Mail-order companies like Sears begin selling them nationwide. Suddenly, the ukulele isn't rare. It's everywhere. And here's why that matters. The early 20th century was a turning point in American leisure culture. The middle class was expanding. Urban families were moving into smaller homes and apartments. Parlor music, informal music performed at home, was popular. But pianos were expensive. Violins required training. Guitars were larger and slightly harder to approach. The ukulele fit perfectly into this moment. Small, portable, affordable, cheerful, and crucially, forgiving. With just a few chord shapes, a beginner could play full songs. That instant gratification made it incredibly appealing. Colleges adopted it quickly. Ukulele clubs formed on campuses across the country. Students strummed together at social gatherings. It became associated with youth culture, light-hearted, modern, carefree. Then came vaudeville. Performers began incorporating the ukulele into comedic routines. The instrument had personality. Its sound was bright and rhythmic. It paired well with humor. A performer could sing, strum, and entertain without an orchestra. One of the most important early figures in spreading the ukulele's popularity was Cliff Ukulele Ike Edwards. He wasn't Hawaiian, he was American, and he turned the instrument into a national performance tool. Edwards was a skilled player and charismatic entertainer. His upbeat songs and easy charm made the ukulele seem approachable. When sound films emerged in the late 1920s, he transitioned into Hollywood and became even more widely known. In fact, he would later provide the voice of Jiminy Cricket in Disney's Pinocchio. But before that, he helped cement the ukulele as a legitimate performance instrument, not just a novelty. By the 1920s, the instrument had become a staple of American popular culture. Then the 1930s arrived. The Great Depression. Consumer spending collapsed. Entertainment shifted. Big bands rose in popularity. Jazz orchestras dominated dance halls. Brass sections were louder. Rhythm sections were fuller. And compared to a 17-piece swing band, the ukulele felt small. Radio also changed music consumption dramatically. Instead of families making music at home, they increasingly listened to professional performers broadcast across the country. Parlor music declined. Instrument sales dropped. The ukulele craze faded. It didn't disappear completely, but it lost dominance. Guitars began evolving. Steel strings improved projection. Archtop guitars became jazz rhythm staples. Eventually, electric guitars would transform music entirely. The ukulele couldn't compete in volume. For a time, it seemed destined to become a cultural footnote, a relic of a brief American fad tied to tropical romanticism. But something unexpected happened. World War II. American soldiers stationed in the Pacific encountered Hawaiian music again. Hawaii became strategically important. Military presence increased, and once again, servicemen were exposed to the ukulele. It traveled home with them. Post-war America entered a period of prosperity. Suburbs expanded, schools invested in music education, and in the 1950s, the ukulele experienced a second American revival. But this time, it looked different. Enter Arthur Godfrey. Godfrey was a radio and television personality with enormous influence. He played the ukulele on his programs and actively promoted it as an accessible instrument for families. But more importantly, he endorsed a specific brand, the plastic ukulele made by the Macaferi Company. Yes, plastic. In a move that shocked traditional instrument makers, Mario Macaferi began producing affordable, injection-molded plastic ukuleles in the late 1940s. They were cheap, durable, mass-producible, and colorful. Millions were sold. At one point, Macaferi was producing up to 50,000 ukuleles per day. Think about that. 50,000 per day. That scale made the ukulele not just popular, but universal. It entered classrooms. Music teachers loved it because it was inexpensive and easy to maintain. Children could strum basic chords within weeks. For many Americans growing up in the 1950s and 1960s, the ukulele was their first instrument. But again, trends shift. By the late 1960s and 1970s, rock music dominated culture. Electric guitars symbolized rebellion and power. Amplification defined modern sound. The ukulele once again seemed soft, quiet, old-fashioned. Its association with novelty acts and children's classrooms didn't help, and so it entered another quiet period. Not extinct, but culturally diminished. And then something remarkable happened in the 1990s. A Hawaiian musician with a gentle voice, a large frame, and a ukulele in his hands recorded a medley that would change everything. A medley of Somewhere Over the Rainbow and What a Wonderful World. His name was Israel Kamakawiwo'ole, And that recording would bring the ukulele back to the global stage in a way no marketing campaign ever could. By the early 1990s, the ukulele was not a cultural force. It existed, but quietly. It lived in classrooms, in a few Hawaiian music circles, in the hands of scattered enthusiasts. It was not charting on Billboard. It was not dominating radio. It was not driving global trends. If you had asked a music executive in 1990 whether the ukulele would become one of the most recognized acoustic sounds in modern media, they likely would have laughed. And then came a voice. Soft, breathy, intimate. In 1993, a Hawaiian musician named Israel Kamakawiwo'ole recorded a stripped-down medley of Somewhere Over the Rainbow and What a Wonderful World. No orchestra, no heavy production, just voice and ukulele. The recording session itself has become part of music legend. Israel reportedly called a recording studio late at night, asking if he could come in. He arrived in the early hours. Within minutes, he performed the song almost entirely in one take. It was raw, unfiltered, and emotionally devastating. When the recording was released, it didn't immediately explode worldwide. It grew slowly. It appeared in films, in television, in commercials. It spread through emotional association. And the sound that carried it? The ukulele. That gentle, shimmering G-C-E-A tuning, the bright but fragile tone, the intimate rhythm. The ukulele was no longer comedic, no longer novelty, no longer childish. It became emotional, tender, soulful. That transformation was critical, because instruments often carry psychological associations. The electric guitar can symbolize rebellion. The piano can symbolize elegance. The violin can symbolize drama. For decades, the ukulele symbolized light entertainment. Israel's recording rewired that perception. Suddenly, the instrument could carry vulnerability. It could carry longing. It could carry hope. And the world heard it. The song began appearing in films throughout the late 1990s and early 2000s. Each placement introduced millions of listeners to that sound again. Many didn't even consciously register the instrument at first. They just felt it. But gradually people began asking, "What is that instrument?" And that question marked the beginning of the ukulele's modern renaissance. Around the same time, something else was happening. The Internet. In the early 2000s, online video platforms began emerging. By 2005, YouTube launched, and the ukulele was perfectly positioned for this new era. Why? Because it is visually engaging. It fits entirely within a webcam frame. It sounds full without needing complex recording equipment. It's portable, it's unintimidating, and most importantly, it's accessible. A teenager with a $40 instrument could upload a cover song from their bedroom. No amplifier required, no band required, no studio required. One person, 4 strings, and a camera. One of the first viral ukulele moments on YouTube came in 2006, when a young musician named Jake Shimabukuro performed George Harrison's "While My Guitar Gently Weeps" on ukulele in Central Park. The performance was uploaded online. It spread rapidly. Viewers were stunned. The ukulele, often dismissed as simple, suddenly sounded virtuosic. Shimabukuro's finger speed, dynamic control, and emotional phrasing shattered assumptions. The instrument wasn't limited. It was misunderstood. That video did something profound. It repositioned the ukulele not just as accessible, but as capable of complexity. It could handle classical arrangements, rock ballads, jazz phrasing, percussive techniques, simultaneous melody and harmony. And in the age of algorithm-driven discovery, that uniqueness mattered. Then came another wave: indie folk. In the late 2000s and early 2000s, Unacoustic-driven music surged in popularity. Artists like Jason Mraz incorporated ukulele into mainstream pop songs. His hit, I'm Yours, featured the instrument prominently. That song became one of the longest-charting Billboard hits of all time. Suddenly, millions of listeners were hearing ukulele in a global pop anthem, and again, it sounded joyful, optimistic, inviting. At the same time, schools began rediscovering it. Music educators recognized its affordability and immediate playability. A classroom set of ukuleles cost far less than a set of guitars. Students could form chords within days. For young learners, early success builds confidence, and the ukulele delivered early success. By the 2000s, ukulele sales began climbing sharply worldwide. Manufacturers reported dramatic growth. Major guitar brands expanded their ukulele lines. Boutique luthiers began crafting high-end models from koa wood, the traditional Hawaiian tone wood long associated with premium instruments. Hawaii itself saw renewed cultural pride in the instrument. Festivals expanded, workshops filled. The ukulele had completed a remarkable journey from Portuguese folk instrument to Hawaiian cultural symbol, to American craze, to classroom relic, to emotional soundtrack, to internet-era icon. Few instruments in history have experienced such repeated cycles of rise and reinvention. And here's what makes it extraordinary. The ukulele never fundamentally changed in size or string count. 4 strings, compact body, short scale. Its design remained largely consistent. What changed was perception, and perception shapes power. By the mid-2000s, ukulele communities flourished online. Tutorials amassed millions of views. Beginners shared progress videos. Grandparents and teenagers played the same instrument across continents. It became cross-generational, cross-cultural, borderless. Because the ukulele lowers the barrier to entry, it encourages participation. And in the digital age, participation spreads visibility. But there's a deeper reason for its resilience. The ukulele does not demand dominance, it invites connection. It's rarely the loudest instrument in the room, but it's often the warmest, and warmth travels well. Today, the ukulele is not merely surviving, it's embedded in global culture. From Tokyo to Berlin, from São Paulo to London, from Honolulu to Los Angeles, its journey continues. But to truly understand its endurance, we need to go deeper into its construction, its tunings, its technical evolution, and the subtle design features that shaped its sound for over a century. Because beneath its simplicity lies remarkable craftsmanship. To understand why the ukulele survived multiple cultural collapses, we have to look at something deceptively simple: its construction. At first glance, the ukulele seems almost minimal. A small wooden body, a short neck, 4 nylon strings, no complex hardware, no elaborate mechanisms. But simplicity in design is rarely accidental. The earliest Hawaiian-made ukuleles in the late 19th century were heavily influenced by Portuguese braguinhas and machetes. However, Hawaiian luthiers began modifying proportions and materials almost immediately. One of the most important shifts was the use of koa wood. Our koa is native to Hawaii. It's lightweight, resonant, and visually stunning, often featuring rich golden-brown tones with dramatic grain patterns. Early Hawaiian builders discovered that koa produced a bright but warm tonal character that complemented the ukulele's short scale. Koa became synonymous with the instrument, and over time, solid koa ukulele would become a mark of quality. But material choice was only part of the story. The ukulele's standard tuning, G, C, E, A, is what truly defines its personality. Specifically, the high G string, Unlike a guitar, where strings typically ascend in pitch from lowest to highest, the traditional soprano ukulele uses reentrant tuning. That means the top string, G, is tuned higher than the C string below it. This creates a unique sonic texture. When you strum a basic chord, the highest pitch often appears not at the top or bottom of the strum, but inside it. That reentrant tuning produces the ukulele's unmistakable sparkle. It gives chords a chiming, clustered brightness. It allows rhythmic strumming patterns to feel buoyant. That design choice, whether intentional or inherited, shaped the instrument's entire identity. Over time, size variations also emerged. The soprano is the original and smallest standard size, usually around 21 inches long. It produces the brightest and most traditional sound. Then came the concert size, slightly larger, with more fret space and fuller tone. Then tenor, deeper resonance, longer sustain, more projection. And eventually, baritone, tuned differently, D-G-B-E, like the top four strings of a guitar, with a lower tonal range. Each size broadened the instrument's expressive possibilities. As musicians experimented, they discovered something powerful. The ukulele, despite its size, could function in multiple musical roles. It could be strictly rhythmic. It could carry melody. It could blend into ensemble settings. It could serve as a songwriting tool. And because it only has four strings, chord shapes are simplified compared to guitar. For example, a C major chord requires just one finger on the third fret of the A string. Instant music. That accessibility is not trivial. Psychologically, instruments that reward early effort encourage persistence. Many beginners quit guitar within months due to finger pain, bar chords, and complex technique barriers. The ukulele reduces that friction. And that friction reduction has influenced millions of musical journeys. But as global interest expanded in the 2000s, craftsmanship also evolved. Modern luthiers began experimenting with alternative tone woods, mahogany, spruce tops, maple, acacia. Each produced subtle tonal variations. Mahogany brought warmth. Spruce added brightness and projection. Maple offered clarity and focus. High-end builders began incorporating intricate inlays, custom bracing patterns, and advanced construction techniques. The ukulele was no longer confined to beginner status. It entered the boutique instrument market. At the same time, technology influenced its evolution. Pickup systems allowed it to be amplified cleanly for stage performance. Equalizers and onboard preamps gave performers control over tone shaping. Professional musicians began incorporating ukulele into large venue performances without sacrificing clarity. Even electric ukuleles emerged, solid body models capable of distortion and effects processing. The instrument's footprint expanded into rock, jazz fusion, experimental music. And then there's technique. Traditional strumming patterns, often referred to as island strums, emphasize rhythm and syncopation. But advanced players pushed boundaries. Fingerstyle techniques allowed players to perform bass, harmony, and melody simultaneously. Percussive tapping transformed the body into a drum. Harmonics added shimmering overtones. Alternate tunings expanded tonal possibilities. What once seemed limited revealed itself as deeply flexible. This is a pattern in music history. Instruments dismissed as simple often contain hidden depth. Consider the harmonica, the banjo, the cajon. The ukulele fits that lineage, and because it is physically small, it encourages experimentation. You can travel with it, play it on a beach, play it in a park, record it in a bedroom. It does not require infrastructure. In a digital era where mobility matters, that's powerful. Global manufacturing also accelerated its accessibility. By the 2000s, factories in Asia were producing affordable models at scale. Entry-level instruments became widely available online. A beginner anywhere in the world could order one with 2 clicks. That democratization amplified the instrument's growth. But something else happened alongside the boom. Communities formed. Ukulele festivals expanded globally, from Hawaii to the United Kingdom to Japan. Mass strumming events brought thousands of players together. Entire orchestras formed composed solely of ukuleles, and Japan, in particular, became one of the instrument's strongest international markets. Japanese craftsmanship merged with Hawaiian tradition. High-quality instruments emerged from workshops in Osaka and beyond. The instrument that began as a Portuguese folk tool had become globally hybridized. Portugal, Hawaii, America, Japan, Europe. Each region layered identity onto it, and still it remained 4 strings, small body, bright voice. Its power lies not in complexity, but in universality. And that universality explains something critical about modern culture. In an age dominated by digital overload, there is renewed hunger for tactile simplicity. The ukulele satisfies that hunger. It's analog, immediate, human. No app required, and as streaming platforms saturated listeners with high-production music, many creators sought intimacy again. The ukulele became the soundtrack of vulnerability in countless indie recordings. Soft vocals, close mic, 4 strings underneath. Simple, honest, but there's still one piece of its history we haven't fully explored. Its deeper roots in Portuguese migration, its transformation in Royal Hawaiian courts, its role in cultural preservation amid colonization. Because the ukulele isn't just a pop culture instrument, it is a story of migration, of adaptation, of identity. Long before the ukulele became a classroom instrument, long before it became a YouTube sensation, it became something far more important. It became a symbol. To understand that transformation, we need to return to late 19th century Hawaii, a time of profound political and cultural tension. When the Portuguese immigrants arrived in Honolulu in 1879, Hawaii was still an independent kingdom, but pressure was building. Western businessmen had increasing economic control through sugar plantations. Missionary influence had reshaped religion and education. Political instability simmered beneath the surface. And during this period, cultural preservation became an act of quiet resistance. King Kalakaua, known as the Merry Monarch, recognized this. He believed Hawaiian identity was under threat, so he leaned into culture. He revived hula, which had been suppressed by missionaries who deemed it immoral. He encouraged traditional chants, ceremonies, and music. He supported public performance. And into that revival stepped the ukulele. What's remarkable is how quickly it was adopted. Within just a few years of its introduction, Hawaiian craftsmen such as Manuel Nunes, Augusto Dias, and José do Espírito Santo began building instruments locally. They were Portuguese by origin, but working within Hawaiian society. This blending of immigrant craftsmanship and island tradition produced something new. The ukulele became part of Hawaiian court entertainment. It accompanied mele, traditional Hawaiian songs. It complemented the steel guitar, which itself was evolving in Hawaii around the same time. The instrument's light, a rhythmic sound fit beautifully beneath dance. Its portability made it ideal for gatherings, and its relative simplicity meant it could spread easily through communities. But here's something often overlooked. The ukulele didn't replace traditional Hawaiian instruments. It joined them. Before Western contact, Hawaiian music centered around percussion, drums, like the pahu, and chanting as the dominant form of musical expression. Melodic string instruments were introduced through global contact. The ukulele became part of that wave. But instead of erasing native forms, it was absorbed into them. That absorption is important. It reflects Hawaii's long history as a crossroads of Pacific cultures. Polynesian voyagers had settled the islands centuries earlier. Later came Europeans, Americans, and Asian laborers. Cultural exchange was constant. The ukulele thrived because Hawaii already understood adaptation. However, political realities soon changed dramatically. In 1893, Queen Liliuokalani was overthrown. By 1898, Hawaii was annexed by the United States. Cultural identity became even more complex. On one hand, Hawaiian music was marketed to Americans as exotic entertainment. On the other, it remained a source of internal pride and continuity for native Hawaiians. The ukulele lived in both worlds. Tourists saw it as charming and tropical. Island residents saw it as woven into daily life. This dual identity shaped its global future. When Hawaiian musicians traveled to the mainland United States in the early 20th century, they carried more than instruments. They carried representation. Their performances at the 1915 Panama Pacific Exposition weren't just concerts. They were cultural exhibitions. Americans watching hula and hearing ukulele were consuming a curated version of Hawaii. And while that exposure created opportunity, it also simplified identity. Hawaiian culture became packaged: palm trees, grass skirts, bright chords. But beneath that packaging, real cultural continuity persisted. Hawaiian musicians continued innovating. Slack key guitar developed further. Steel guitar became central to country music on the mainland, and the ukulele remained embedded in community gatherings across the islands. Through the early 20th century, Hawaii produced remarkable ukulele players whose names rarely appear in mainstream American histories. Players like Ernest Kai were instrumental in formalizing technique. Hankei even published some of the earliest instructional materials for ukulele. He helped standardize tuning approaches and teaching methods. That's critical. Standardization enables scale. Without consistent tuning and chord systems, the instrument could not have expanded globally. As American demand grew, Hawaiian players toured internationally. Sheet music labeled Hawaiian flooded publishing houses. And yet, by the 1930s and 1940s, much of what mainland America considered Hawaiian music had already been filtered through commercial lenses. Meanwhile, on the islands, the instrument continued evolving quietly. Family traditions passed it down. Local builders refined craftsmanship, and cultural memory endured through song. This endurance matters because later revivals weren't spontaneous. They were built on continuity. When Israel Kamakawiwo Ole recorded his now iconic medley in the early 1990s, he wasn't reviving a dead instrument. He was continuing a living one. His version resonated globally because it carried authentic lineage. You could hear Hawaii in it, not caricature, not novelty, but rootedness. The ukulele's Hawaiian chapter is not a footnote, it is the emotional core of its identity. And here's something fascinating. Unlike many colonial-era cultural exports, the ukulele eventually returned to Hawaii stronger. In the 21st century, tourism still markets it, but native Hawaiian musicians also reclaim it as heritage. Festivals in Honolulu draw thousands. Workshops teach both technique and history. Younger generations learn not only chords, but context, because the ukulele's story is inseparable from migration, monarchy, annexation, and adaptation. It reflects how cultures survive by absorbing, reshaping, and redefining external influence, and that resilience may explain why the instrument has outlived multiple global shifts. It survived industrialization. It survived the Depression. It survived the electric guitar revolution. It survived the digital age, because at its heart it carries something older than trends. It carries story, and when instruments carry story, they endure. But there's another transformation we haven't explored yet: the ukulele's migration beyond Hawaii and America, its explosive rise in Japan, its integration into European folk scenes, its unexpected popularity in places far removed from tropical imagery. Because in the 21st century, the ukulele stopped belonging to one culture. It became planetary. By the early 2000s, something unusual was happening. The ukulele was no longer just Hawaiian. It was no longer just American. It was quietly becoming global. And nowhere was that more evident than in Japan. Japan's relationship with the ukulele is one of the most fascinating chapters in the instrument's history. After World War II, American cultural influence flooded into Japan. Jazz, rock, Hollywood films, all entered Japanese society rapidly during Reconstruction. Alongside them came Hawaiian music. But Japan didn't just consume Hawaiian music, it embraced it. In the 1950s and 1960s, Hawaiian-themed music gained remarkable popularity in Japan. Resorts, dance halls, and themed venues featured steel guitar and ukulele performances. For many Japanese listeners, Hawaii symbolized warmth, romance, and escape, much like it had for mainland Americans decades earlier. But unlike America's earlier ukulele craze, Japan's adoption was not short-lived. It became embedded. Japanese musicians studied Hawaiian techniques carefully. They valued precision and craftsmanship, two cultural qualities that translated beautifully into ukulele performance and instrument building. By the late 20th century, Japan had developed a thriving community of ukulele players and luthiers. Companies such as Kiwaya became known for producing high-quality instruments that rivaled traditional Hawaiian builders. Japanese ukuleles were meticulously crafted with attention to detail and tonal balance that impressed professionals worldwide. Festivals in Tokyo drew thousands. Ukulele orchestras formed in community centers. And importantly, the instrument was not treated as a novelty. It was respected. While the United States occasionally relegated the ukulele to children's classrooms or comedic acts, Japan cultivated it as a serious musical instrument. This difference in perception helped sustain its international reputation. But Japan wasn't alone. In the United Kingdom, a completely different cultural phenomenon was unfolding. In 2009, a group called the Ukulele Orchestra of Great Britain gained international attention. Dressed in formal evening wear, they performed eclectic arrangements, from Tchaikovsky to Nirvana, entirely on ukuleles. Their performances were witty, precise, unexpected, and they proved something profound. The ukulele could handle complexity without losing charm. Their orchestral arrangements shattered the idea that 4 strings meant limitation. Audiences across Europe saw the instrument in a new light. And then there was Germany. Germany's folk and singer-songwriter scenes began incorporating ukulele into acoustic sets. Its gentle projection worked beautifully in intimate cafe settings. In Brazil, musicians blended it with samba rhythms. In Canada and Australia, it entered school systems and indie folk movements. And all of this growth occurred alongside the rise of online learning. YouTube tutorials multiplied rapidly. Thousands of creators uploaded beginner lessons. 4 chords became a global gateway: C, G, A, M, F. With those shapes alone, a player could perform hundreds of modern pop songs, and in a generation shaped by digital access, that mattered. Now, music no longer required formal training or private instruction. It required curiosity and Wi-Fi. The ukulele's low barrier to entry fit perfectly into that ecosystem. It became the instrument of creators, not necessarily professionals, creators, people who wanted to sing in bedrooms, people who wanted to post covers, people who wanted to connect. By the mid-2000s, ukulele sales surged dramatically worldwide. Major manufacturers reported exponential growth. Online retailers struggled to keep up with demand during certain holiday seasons. And here's the fascinating part. Much of this growth came from adults, not just children. Adults who had never played an instrument before. Adults seeking stress relief. Adults rediscovering music after years away. The ukulele offered something psychologically powerful. Immediate reward. Within 1 week, a beginner could strum a recognizable song. Within 1 month, they could accompany themselves singing. Within 1 year, they could explore fingerstyle arrangements. That progression curve is motivating. Compare that to violin or classical piano, where months of practice may be required before music sounds satisfying. The ukulele shortens the distance between effort and joy is contagious. Communities formed both online and offline. Mass strum events became common. Gatherings where hundreds or even thousands of players performed the same song simultaneously. The image of a stadium filled not with electric guitars, but with small wooden instruments, says something about its cultural shift. It represents accessibility, participation, collective music-making. And yet, amid this explosion of popularity, the instrument remained physically modest. 4 strings, small body, wooden frame. No dramatic redesign. Few instruments in modern history have expanded globally without technological transformation. The ukulele didn't need reinvention, it needed recognition. But here's where the story deepens, because alongside its global expansion, a debate emerged. Is the ukulele a real instrument? Is it serious? Is it limited? For decades, critics dismissed it as simplistic. But serious players responded not with argument, but with performance. Virtuosos like Jake Shimabukuro continued redefining technical boundaries. Classical musicians arranged Bach for ukulele. Jazz artists explored complex chord voicings. Contemporary composers wrote original works specifically for the instrument. And modern luthiers experimented with bracing patterns, tone woods, and construction techniques to improve sustain and projection. The instrument matured, and as it matured, perceptions shifted. Today, the ukulele occupies a unique position in music culture. It is both beginner-friendly and performance-worthy, both playful and profound, both intimate and communal. Its journey from Portuguese dockside curiosity to global phenomenon spans continents, wars, technological revolutions, and cultural shifts. But perhaps its greatest strength lies in something quieter. It doesn't intimidate, it invites. In a world often saturated with complexity, the ukulele offers clarity. In a world often divided by genre and identity, it crosses boundaries easily. And in a digital age that can feel isolating, it encourages participation. But there is still one final layer to explore: the psychology of its sound. Why does the ukulele feel hopeful? Why does it evoke warmth almost instantly? Why does its tone carry emotional resonance disproportionate to its size? That answer lies in acoustics and in human perception. Close your eyes for a moment and imagine the sound of a ukulele. Not a specific song, just the instrument. Bright, soft, warm. There is something about its tone that feels instantly disarming. It rarely sounds aggressive. It rarely sounds heavy. Even when played quickly, it retains a kind of buoyancy. That emotional response is not accidental. It's rooted in physics. The ukulele's small body size limits the depth of its bass frequencies. Unlike a guitar, which produces strong low-end resonance, the ukulele emphasizes mid-range and upper-mid frequencies. Human hearing is particularly sensitive to that range. It's the range of the human voice. It's the range where speech clarity lives. That may explain why the ukulele pairs so naturally with singing. Its frequency range does not compete heavily with vocals. Instead, it supports them. Then there's the re-entrant tuning, the high G string. When you strum a chord on a ukulele, the highest pitch often appears in the middle of the chord cluster, not at the edge. That creates a shimmering effect. It gives even simple chords a sense of movement. It adds sparkle. Psychologically, bright harmonic overtones are often associated with positive emotion. Major chords on ukulele can feel particularly uplifting because of how tightly clustered and high their voicings are. Bow instruments with deeper, heavier resonance often evoke gravity. The ukulele evokes lightness, and that lightness has shaped its cultural identity repeatedly. During the 1915 exposition in San Francisco, audiences described Hawaiian music as cheerful and breezy. In the 1950s classroom boom, it was described as friendly and accessible. In the 2000s indie revival, it was described as warm and intimate. Different eras, same emotional core. There's also a tactile element. The strings are usually nylon, not steel. Nylon is softer under the fingers. It produces less metallic attack. That changes not only the sound, but the experience of playing. Beginners encounter less physical pain compared to steel-string guitar. That reduces early frustration, and early frustration determines whether someone continues learning. The ukulele removes barriers, acoustically and physically. That's powerful. But here's something even more interesting. Because of its size, the ukulele forces closeness. You hold it near your chest. Your strumming arm wraps around it. Your ear is physically close to the sound hole. It's intimate. Compare that to a grand piano where the instrument feels external, or an electric guitar with amplifier where the sound is projected away from you. The ukulele feels personal. That intimacy may be one reason it thrived on YouTube. Webcam videos favor instruments that sound full in small spaces. The ukulele fills a bedroom with enough resonance to feel complete, but not overwhelming. And visually, it reads well on camera. Its shape is recognizable. Its scale is charming. It feels approachable even through a screen. Then there's another factor: rhythm. The ukulele excels at percussive strumming. Its short sustain means notes decay quickly. That creates space between strokes. That rhythmic clarity makes it ideal for syncopation. Hawaiian strumming patterns often emphasize offbeats, giving the instrument its distinctive swing. In modern pop covers, players often use down-up patterns that feel conversational rather than aggressive. That rhythmic accessibility means a beginner can create groove without mastering complex picking techniques. And groove builds confidence, but beyond acoustics and ergonomics lies something deeper: cultural memory. For many listeners, the ukulele is subconsciously tied to images of beaches, sunsets, and calm waters. Even if someone has never visited Hawaii, decades of media have embedded that association. Film scores, commercials, travel ads, they've all used the instrument as shorthand for relaxation. And so, when you hear it, your brain activates stored imagery. That imagery reinforces emotional response. It feels peaceful, optimistic, hopeful. Israel Kamakawiwo'ole's recording tapped directly into that emotional reservoir. His voice combined vulnerability with tonal warmth. The ukulele beneath him shimmered gently. The result was a sonic environment that felt safe. And safety is rare in music. Many instruments evoke intensity, drama, or spectacle. The ukulele often evokes comfort. That comfort explains why it surged again during times of global stress, during economic downturns, during uncertain periods. During the early months of the COVID-19 pandemic, ukulele sales rose again in some regions. People sought simple creative outlets at home. The instrument's low cost and immediate playability made it ideal. And that pattern mirrors earlier decades. After World War II, it flourished in suburban households. After digital saturation, it flourished in online spaces. It thrives when people seek connection. But the instrument's emotional palette is broader than most assume. In minor keys, it can sound haunting. In fingerstyle arrangements, it can sound delicate and intricate. Jazz players use extended chords that reveal surprising sophistication. Baritone ukuleles, tuned like a guitar's top 4 strings, offer deeper tonal colors. Some performers even explore alternate tunings that expand harmonic depth. The instrument's perceived simplicity masks wide, expressive range. And that duality, simple surface, complex potential, may be its greatest strength, because it allows entry at any level. You can strum 3 chords at a campfire, or perform Bach on a concert stage. Same instrument, different depth. That elasticity ensures longevity. But there's still one chapter we haven't fully examined: the tension between tradition and commercialization, between Hawaiian cultural roots and global branding, between authenticity and marketing. Because as the ukulele became globally popular, questions emerged. Who owns it? Who represents it? Who benefits from its image? And those questions matter, especially in a world more aware of cultural history than ever before. The ukulele is more than 4 strings. It is migration, it is monarchy, it is annexation, it is globalization. And its future depends not only on popularity, but on understanding. That understanding is where we go next. As the ukulele spread across continents in the 21st century, something subtle began to surface. A question: who does this instrument belong to? On the surface, the answer seems simple. It was brought from Portugal, transformed in Hawaii, commercialized in America, adopted worldwide. But cultural ownership is rarely simple, because instruments carry stories, and stories carry identity. In Hawaii, the ukulele is not merely a tourist symbol, it is woven into lived memory. It accompanied mele sung in families. It supported hula during cultural revival. It echoed through royal courts during a time of political tension. So when global marketing reduces it to a beach prop, there's friction. For decades, tourism campaigns used the ukulele as shorthand for paradise. Airline commercials, travel brochures, resort soundtracks, bright chords under slow-motion ocean waves. That image boosted popularity, but it also simplified history, because the ukulele is tied to a kingdom that was overthrown, to land that was annexed, to cultural survival during periods of suppression. That deeper narrative often disappears in branding, and yet something interesting happened in recent years. As conversations around cultural preservation grew globally, Hawaiian musicians began recentering the instrument within authentic context. Workshops and festivals increasingly emphasize history alongside technique. Players learn not just chords, but lineage. They learn about Manuel Nunes and early luthiers. They learn about King Kalakaua's patronage. They learn about the role of music in preserving language. This reframing strengthens the instrument's identity because popularity without context can flatten culture, but popularity with context can amplify it. Meanwhile, globalization continues. And here's the paradox. The ukulele thrives precisely because it adapts. It flourished in America because it fit parlor culture. It flourished in Japan because it fit craftsmanship and discipline. It flourished online because it fit digital intimacy. Adaptation fuels survival, but adaptation can also blur origin. So how does an instrument remain globally accessible while honoring its roots? The answer may lie in storytelling. When musicians mention Hawaii in interviews, when festivals invite Hawaiian artists as headliners, when instrument makers source koe responsibly and educate buyers about its heritage, those actions reconnect the sound to its story, and story builds respect. Another dimension of this conversation involves manufacturing. As demand surged in the 2000s and 2010s, mass production increased dramatically. Factories in China and Indonesia began producing millions of entry-level ukuleles annually. This lowered cost barriers worldwide. But it also raised questions about quality and sustainability. Cheap laminated models made it easy for beginners to start. But they sometimes lack tonal richness compared to solid wood instruments. At the same time, Hawaiian koa, historically prized, became more regulated due to conservation concerns. Modern builders increasingly use alternative tone woods like acacia, mahogany, and spruce. Sustainability is now part of the conversation. An instrument rooted in natural wood must consider environmental impact, and that's a modern layer added to its story. There's also innovation happening in design. Some builders experiment with carbon fiber ukuleles, weather-resistant, durable, stable in humidity changes. Others build multi-scale fretboards for ergonomic comfort. There are 8-string ukuleles with paired strings that create a chorus effect. There are bass ukuleles, tuned like upright bass, but compact. The instrument's family keeps expanding, and yet, despite these experiments, the classic 4-string soprano remains iconic. It's instantly recognizable. It fits in overhead luggage. It can hang on a wall like art. Its scale invites touch. And perhaps that physical accessibility is why it crosses generational lines so easily. Grandparents teach grandchildren. Parents buy them as first instruments. Retirees pick them up later in life. Few instruments feel so unintimidating. But here's another factor driving its resilience: community. Ukulele culture is unusually collaborative. Mass strum events, online chord charts shared freely, open mic nights dominated by group sing-alongs. Unlike some competitive musical spaces, ukulele communities often emphasize participation over virtuosity. That tone shapes perception. It becomes less about mastery, more about connection, and connection is culturally powerful. In fact, some sociologists have noted that communal music making strengthens social bonds and reduces feelings of isolation. The ukulele, by lowering skill barriers, increases communal access. In that sense, it serves a social function beyond entertainment. But there's still something even more fascinating: the ukulele's ability to cross genre boundaries. It appears in pop songs, in indie folk, in reggae, in jazz, in children's music, in classical arrangements, in lo-fi bedroom recordings. Few acoustic instruments integrate so seamlessly across genres without dramatic modification. That versatility protects it from trend cycles. If pop fades, it remains in folk. If folk fades, it remains in classrooms. If classrooms shift, it thrives online. It never depends entirely on one scene. And that diversification builds stability. Now consider something deeper. The ukulele has survived more than 140 years. In that time, countless musical technologies have emerged: phonographs, radio, television, electric amplification, synthesizers, digital production, streaming platforms, AI-generated music. Through all of that, the ukulele persists unchanged in essence: wood, strings, human hands. There's something almost symbolic about that. In a world of accelerating complexity, it remains simple. In a world of digital abstraction, it remains tactile. And that may be its ultimate strength. But the story isn't over, because as music technology continues evolving, new questions arise. Will the ukulele integrate with digital tools? Will it remain analog refuge? Will it become hybridized in unexpected ways? And how will the next generation reinterpret it? The future of the ukulele may not look like its past, but if history tells us anything, it tells us this: the instrument adapts, and adaptation has always been its superpower. We've traced its journey from Portuguese migration to Hawaiian courts, to American craze, to near disappearance, to emotional renaissance, to global phenomenon. But now we must step back, because understanding the ukulele's full impact requires perspective, not just musical, but cultural, economic, psychological, and symbolic. Let's step back for a moment. Strip away the festivals. Strip away the viral videos. Strip away the tourist imagery. What remains? A small wooden instrument that has survived empire, industrialization, world wars, the electric revolution, and the digital age. That level of survival is rare. Most instruments peak in a single era. The harpsichord dominated the Baroque period, then nearly vanished. The banjo exploded in 19th century America, then retreated into niche genres. The accordion surged in early 20th century Europe and America, then faded from mainstream pop. The ukulele, however, has risen multiple times. Why? The answer isn't just musical, it's structural. First, economic accessibility. From its earliest American boom in the 1910s, the ukulele was affordable. During the Great Depression, that affordability mattered. In post-war suburbs, plastic models made it even cheaper. In the Internet age, global manufacturing kept entry costs low. Low-cost instruments invite experimentation, and experimentation fuels survival. Second, portability. The ukulele fits into small apartments, dorm rooms, travel bags, and classrooms. It doesn't require a dedicated studio or storage space. In crowded urban environments, portability becomes an advantage. Third, social scale. The ukulele works equally well alone or in groups. One person can sing softly with it, or 1,000 people can strum together in a public square. Few instruments balance intimacy and collectivity so easily. But there's a fourth factor that may be the most powerful: identity flexibility. Some instruments are tightly bound to one genre or cultural meaning. The sitar is strongly associated with Indian classical music. The bagpipes are tied to Scottish heritage. The didgeridoo carries Aboriginal Australian significance. The ukulele, by contrast, has fluid identity. It began Portuguese, became Hawaiian, was adopted American, expanded Japanese, integrated European, and now belongs to global internet culture. That identity fluidity allows it to move between spaces without resistance. It can appear in a children's classroom without seeming out of place. It can appear on a concert stage without seeming absurd. It can appear in a pop hit without seeming forced. And that flexibility gives it resilience. But let's go deeper. There's something psychological happening, too. Music psychologists have studied how people perceive instrument size and sound. Smaller instruments often feel less intimidating. Larger instruments can feel formal or imposing. The ukulele's size signals approachability. When someone holds it, their body language softens. It invites audience participation. Compare that to a performer gripping a loud electric guitar with distortion. The visual message is different. Neither is better, but the signals differ. The ukulele signals inclusion, and in a time when music consumption has shifted from passive listening to participatory culture, think covers, duets, live streams, inclusion matters. Then there's nostalgia. For many adults today, the ukulele connects to childhood. Maybe they played one in elementary school. Maybe they saw it in a cartoon. Maybe they heard it in a film soundtrack. When they pick it up again later in life, they reconnect with that earlier emotional memory. Nostalgia is a powerful motivator in consumer behavior, and the ukulele taps into it gently. But the instrument's cultural meaning also evolves with each generation. For Gen Z creators, the ukulele became associated with bedroom authenticity. In the late 2000s, countless young artists recorded original songs with nothing more than voice and ukulele. It signaled vulnerability. It felt raw. It felt unfiltered. In contrast to heavily produced pop tracks, it offered emotional transparency. Even meme culture embraced it. Some viral internet songs used ukulele specifically because it softened controversial or comedic lyrics. Its sweetness created contrast. That contrast amplified humor. And humor fuels virality. So the instrument adapted again, not by changing shape, but by shifting symbolic function. Yet amid all this growth, there are cycles. Every boom invites saturation. As ukulele content flooded YouTube and TikTok, some audiences began perceiving it as overused. Trends move quickly online, and the question arises again: is the ukulele peaking? History suggests something interesting. Every time it appears to peak, it transforms rather than disappears. After the 1920s craze, it retreated, then returned in the 1950s. After the classroom boom faded, it retreated, then returned in the 2000s. Each cycle redefined its identity, which suggests that even if mainstream spotlight shifts, the instrument's foundation remains strong. Because unlike trend-driven tools, the ukulele exists in daily practice, in homes, in classrooms, in community centers. That distributed presence protects it from collapse. But let's also address criticism. Some musicians argue that the ukulele oversimplifies harmony, that its limited range restricts complexity, that its tonal depth cannot match larger instruments. These critiques aren't entirely wrong, but they miss something. Constraint breeds creativity. Jazz guitarists once faced similar criticism compared to piano, yet they developed innovative voicings within limitation. Ukulele players have done the same. Advanced performers use chord substitutions, percussive techniques, tapping, and harmonics to expand sonic space. Some even incorporate looping pedals to layer multiple parts live. The instrument's limitations become playgrounds, and in creative culture, playgrounds matter. There's also an emotional honesty to limitation. 4 strings require choice. You cannot fill every frequency. You must leave space. That space allows vocals and lyrics to breathe. Many singer-songwriters find that liberating. And that's why, even amid digital production abundance, the ukulele continues appearing in songwriting sessions. It strips songs down to essentials. If a melody works over 4 strings, it likely works anywhere. Then that utility ensures ongoing relevance in creative circles. Now, as we approach the final stretch of this documentary journey, we face an interesting reality. The ukulele has become so normalized that its extraordinary journey is often overlooked. Few people think about its Portuguese dockside beginnings. Few remember its royal Hawaiian patronage. Few connect its classroom revival to post-war plastics manufacturing. Few trace its internet explosion back to a late-night studio session in Honolulu. But that layered history is what makes it remarkable. It is not just a cute instrument, it is a case study in cultural migration, in adaptation, in resilience, and, perhaps most importantly, in joy. Because across every era, one emotional thread remains constant. When people strum a ukulele, they tend to smile. And instruments that generate smiles survive. But what does the future hold? Will artificial intelligence generate ukulele-like tones digitally? Will hybrid acoustic-electric designs dominate? Will new genres claim it? Or will it remain a refuge for simplicity in an increasingly complex world? Now we arrive at the present. And the present is complicated. Music today is more accessible than at any point in human history. Anyone can produce a song from a laptop. Anyone can upload it globally in seconds. Artificial intelligence can now generate melodies, chord progressions, even synthetic instrument tones. Digital plugins can replicate orchestras. Sampling libraries can simulate almost any acoustic instrument. So, in a world where sound can be manufactured infinitely, why does a small wooden instrument still matter? Why does the ukulele continue to thrive? The answer lies in something technology struggles to replicate: touch. When you hold a ukulele, you feel vibration against your chest. You feel the tension of nylon strings under your fingertips. You feel wood resonating. There is no screen between you and the sound, and in a digital era, tactile experience becomes valuable. The rise of vinyl records in the streaming age proves this. The resurgence of film photography proves this. People crave analog experiences precisely because digital ones dominate. The ukulele fits that craving perfectly. It is simple, it is physical, it is immediate, and yet it also integrates with modern technology seamlessly. Today's ukulele players stream live performances. They record multi-track arrangements from home studios. They collaborate across continents through file sharing. They teach globally via online platforms. The instrument remains analog. Its distribution and learning methods are digital. That hybrid balance positions it well for the future. But there's another emerging shift worth examining: mental health awareness. Over the last decade, conversations around stress, anxiety, and burnout have increased dramatically. Music therapy research consistently shows that playing instruments reduces stress hormones and increases dopamine levels. The ukulele's accessibility makes it an ideal therapeutic tool. It doesn't require advanced training. It doesn't intimidate beginners. It allows quick musical reward. Hospitals, senior centers, and community therapy programs increasingly incorporate ukulele workshops. Group strumming sessions have been shown to improve mood and social bonding, and that social bonding may be critical. Loneliness is now considered a major public health issue in many countries. The ukulele's communal nature addresses that directly. It's easier to form a ukulele circle than a symphony orchestra. You don't need rehearsal rooms or expensive equipment, just people. And 4 strings. Now consider education. Music programs worldwide face funding cuts regularly. Instruments like violins and clarinets can be expensive and fragile. The ukulele offers schools a budget-friendly alternative. It introduces harmony, rhythm, and chord structure quickly. Students experience success early. That early success often determines whether they continue musical education, and many who start on ukulele transition later to guitar, piano, or other instruments. In that sense, the ukulele functions as a gateway. It democratizes entry into music. But the future also brings challenges. As trends accelerate online, instrument popularity can spike and dip quickly. There are already signals of saturation in certain social media circles. Some critics argue the ukulele is overused in influencer culture. Some genres are moving toward heavier electronic production again. But here's the pattern we've seen repeatedly. The ukulele does not disappear when spotlight fades. It retreats into community. It waits. It reemerges in new context. It survived radio. It survived rock. It survived synth pop. It survived EDM. And now it coexists with all of them. That coexistence suggests durability. Then there's innovation. Luthiers are experimenting with sustainable materials. Bamboo, reclaimed wood, composite materials that reduce environmental impact. Electroacoustic designs are becoming more refined. Effects pedals designed specifically for ukulele are entering the market. Some artists are blending ukulele with loop stations to create layered live performances that rival full bands. And yes, AI tools can now generate ukulele tones. But generated tone lacks human imperfection. And imperfection often creates emotional authenticity, the slight hesitation in a strum, the subtle squeak of fingers shifting chords, the breath before a lyric. Those details matter. They signal presence, and presence cannot be automated easily. Now let's zoom out even further. The ukulele has crossed nearly a century and a half. Few cultural artifacts maintain relevance across that span. It began in 1879 on a dock in Honolulu. It gained royal endorsement. It fueled an American craze. It collapsed during economic downturn. It revived in suburban classrooms. It faded under electric dominance. It reemerged through a Hawaiian voice. It exploded online. It globalized. And now it stands at a new threshold. But perhaps the most important question isn't about market trends. It's about meaning. Why does the ukulele feel hopeful? Why does it evoke optimism almost instantly? Perhaps because its history is one of resilience. It was born from migration. It survived political upheaval. It endured cultural commercialization. It adapted across continents. And it kept inviting people to play. The ukulele does not demand virtuosity to create beauty. It allows participation at any level, and in a world often obsessed with perfection, that invitation is radical. Now imagine a future 50 years from today. Will children still strum it in classrooms? Will virtual reality concerts feature digital ukuleles? Will Hawaiian festivals continue honoring its roots? If history is any guide, the instrument will still exist, perhaps in a slightly different form, perhaps in new genres, but still recognizable, still 4 strings, still compact, still bright, because instruments that embed themselves into everyday life tend to endure, and the ukulele has embedded itself deeply. We've traced its origin, its transformation, its collapse and revival cycles, its acoustic design, its psychological resonance, its global migration, but we haven't yet explored one final dimension. The stories of the players, the individuals whose lives were shaped by it, because instruments survive through people, and the ukulele's greatest legacy may not be its sound, but the millions of hands that have held it. Every instrument has legends, but the ukulele's legends are different. They are not always stadium-filling rock stars. They are not always conservatory-trained virtuosos. Often, they are storytellers, cultural carriers, quiet revolutionaries. Let's begin again with Israel Kamakawiwo'ole. When his version of Somewhere Over the Rainbow spread globally, most listeners did not know his history. They did not know he was deeply connected to the Hawaiian sovereignty movement. They did not know that his music carried political undertones of cultural preservation. They heard tenderness. But beneath that tenderness was identity. Israel, known affectionately as Is, embodied the merging of tradition and modernity. His ukulele wasn't ornamental, it was rooted. When he strummed, he was continuing a lineage that stretched back to royal courts and community gatherings. And after his passing in 1997, his music only grew stronger. That posthumous rise cemented the ukulele's emotional credibility worldwide. Then there is Jake Shimabukuro. Where Is leaned into warmth and simplicity, Jake leaned into virtuosity. When his Central Park performance of While My Guitar Gently Weeps went viral in 2006, it changed global perception overnight. Suddenly, the ukulele wasn't just sweet, it was powerful. Shimabukuro's technique incorporated rapid finger-picking, dynamic swells, and intricate melodic phrasing that rivaled classical guitarists. He proved something important. Limitation does not equal lack of depth. He toured internationally, played with orchestras, collaborated across genres, and, through that exposure, audiences who once dismissed the instrument began reconsidering it. Then there are artists like James Hill in Canada who expanded technical boundaries with percussive tapping and complex arrangements. Or Timane Gardner in Hawaii, who blends classical technique with rock intensity. Or Eddie Kamai, whose work preserved traditional Hawaiian musical heritage. Each artist represents a different facet of the instrument's identity, and beyond famous names lie millions of unknown players, teachers who introduce it to children, parents who strum bedtime songs, and retirees who form community groups, content creators who upload covers from bedrooms. Their stories rarely trend globally, but they sustain the instrument's ecosystem. In fact, the ukulele may be one of the most democratic instruments in modern history. You don't need wealth to access it. You don't need elite training. You don't need expensive amplification. You need curiosity. That democratization has cultural implications. Music was once gated heavily by cost and access. Private lessons, instrument expense, performance venues. Today, a $50 ukulele and free online tutorials can launch a musical journey. And that accessibility reshapes who participates in music culture. It expands voices. It diversifies creators. It lowers entry barriers. That democratization is part of why the ukulele feels youthful, but even after nearly 150 years. But let's look at another dimension: gender. Historically, certain instruments were gender-coded in Western culture. Violins and flutes were often encouraged for girls. Drums and electric guitars were often steered toward boys. The ukulele, interestingly, resists that coding. Its size does not intimidate smaller hands. Its sound does not carry aggressive stereotypes. It appears equally in the hands of men and women across cultures. That neutrality broadens participation. Then there's age. Many instruments are associated with youth training and then abandoned. The ukulele often works in reverse. People discover it later in life. It becomes a second-chance instrument, something approachable after decades of believing, "I'm not musical." That emotional reversal matters because it rewrites identity. When someone in their 50s or 60s learns their first song, the instrument becomes transformative. It challenges internal narratives about limitation. That psychological shift may be as important as any musical one. Now consider cultural exchange. In Japan, ukulele players often travel to Hawaii for workshops. In Hawaii, musicians tour Japan. In Europe, festivals invite Hawaiian performers to headline events. The instrument becomes a bridge between cultures. And that bridge effect extends beyond tourism. It fosters dialogue, respect, shared tradition. In an increasingly polarized world, shared creative activity can soften division. The ukulele's collaborative nature contributes to that. But no instrument exists without commercial forces. As demand grows, brands compete. Influencers promote models. Social media algorithms reward trend participation. There is risk in commercialization. When any cultural symbol becomes monetized heavily, authenticity can blur. But history shows that the ukulele's roots are resilient. Because even during its most commercialized periods, the 1920s craze, the 1950s plastic boom, grassroots playing continued. Commercial waves rise and fall. Community playing persists, and that persistence is key. So what does all of this mean? It means the ukulele is not defined by any single era, not by Hawaiian royalty, not by American fads, not by YouTube virality, not by classroom programs. It is defined by continuity, by hands passing it forward, by stories carried in song, by adaptation without erasure. It has absorbed Portuguese craft, Hawaiian identity, American mass production, Japanese precision, digital distribution, and it remains recognizable. Few instruments manage that balance. As we move toward the final chapters of this journey, the question shifts again. Not, where did it come from? Not, why did it become popular? But, what does it represent now? Is it joy? Is it nostalgia? Is it resistance? Is it simplicity in a complex world? Or is it something even deeper? A reminder that music does not need to be large to be meaningful, because in the end, 4 strings changed the world quietly, not through volume, but through invitation. And in the final stretch of this documentary, we'll explore what that invitation means for the future of music itself. Let's imagine something unusual, a world without the ukulele, no 1915 exposition craze, a no-plastic classroom boom, no gentle Hawaiian medley echoing through films, no bedroom covers softly strummed into webcams, no mass strum festivals filling parks with hundreds of smiling players. Music would still exist, of course, but something subtle would be missing. An entry point. The ukulele occupies a very specific space in the musical ecosystem. It sits between complexity and simplicity, between performance and participation, between tradition and reinvention. Remove it, and that bridge narrows, and bridges matter. Because the history of music is not only shaped by virtuosos, it is shaped by gateways. The recorder introduced many children to breath control, the harmonica introduced many to blues phrasing, the ukulele introduced millions to harmony. Harmony, the stacking of notes into chords, is foundational to Western music theory. Yet many people grow up never fully understanding how chords function. The ukulele makes chords visible. 4 strings, 4 fingers, shapes that repeat across songs. A learner begins to recognize patterns, C to G to A, M to F, 1, 5, 6, 4. Suddenly, pop music becomes decipherable. That cognitive unlock often leads to deeper exploration. Some transition to guitar, some to piano, some remain devoted to the ukulele for life. But almost all gain musical literacy through it. That literacy shapes listening habits too. A ukulele player doesn't just hear songs passively. They listen for chord changes, strumming patterns, key shifts. Participation rewires perception, and that rewiring extends beyond music. Studies consistently show that musical training enhances pattern recognition, memory retention, and emotional processing. The ukulele's accessibility increases the number of people exposed to those benefits. It democratizes cognitive enrichment, but its influence extends into something less measurable: confidence. When someone learns their first song, even a simple 3-chord tune, something shifts internally. They create sound, they control rhythm, they accompany their own voice. That moment builds agency, and agency is powerful. In classrooms, shy students often find voice through small instruments. In retirement communities, isolated individuals rediscover social belonging through group strumming. In online communities, introverted creators find audiences. The instrument becomes more than wood and string. It becomes permission. Permission to try. Permission to sound imperfect. Permission to join. Now, let's look at the broader musical landscape. Technology continues advancing rapidly. AI-generated compositions are increasing in sophistication. Virtual instruments replicate acoustic textures convincingly. Digital workstations make orchestration accessible without live musicians. And yet, amid all this innovation, acoustic music remains deeply valued. Why? Because acoustic sound carries human effort. You can hear fingers shifting. You can hear breath between lyrics. You can hear the subtle variation in tempo. The ukulele embodies that rawness beautifully. It does not hide behind heavy production. It reveals touch. And as long as audiences crave authenticity, acoustic instruments will survive. But survival alone isn't enough. Relevance matters, and the ukulele remains relevant because it adapts without losing identity. Consider how it integrates into modern genres. Indie pop artists layer ukulele beneath electronic beats. Lo-fi producers sample ukulele chords and filter them through digital textures. Singer-songwriters alternate between guitar and ukulele depending on mood. Children's entertainers use it for warmth and approachability. Even comedians leverage its tonal innocence for ironic contrast. Its tonal fingerprint remains recognizable, yet it doesn't dominate the mix. It supports, and support roles often endure longer than lead roles. There's also an interesting cultural shift happening now. Minimalism is gaining renewed appreciation in design, in architecture, in lifestyle movements. Less clutter, less noise, more intention. The ukulele aligns with that philosophy. 4 strings instead of 6, small body instead of large, portable instead of stationary. It embodies musical minimalism, and minimalism historically cycles back into fashion repeatedly. But what about 50 years from now? What might the ukulele look like in 2075? Perhaps sustainable materials will dominate construction. Perhaps carbon-neutral manufacturing processes will define production. Perhaps digital-analog hybrids will allow players to record holographic performances from living rooms. Perhaps global festivals will stream immersive 3D mass strums across continents. But regardless of technological evolution, the core will likely remain the same. Wood, strings, hands, because that formula has survived everything thrown at it so far. Now, zoom out even further. The ukulele's journey mirrors global migration patterns. It began with Portuguese laborers crossing oceans. It rooted itself in Hawaiian soil. It traveled through American annexation and commercialization. It crossed into Japan post-war. It diffused through Europe. It embedded itself online. It followed people. Where people go, instruments travel, and migration shapes culture. The ukulele is a sonic artifact of migration, of adaptation under pressure, of identity redefinition. And perhaps that's why it resonates emotionally, because its story mirrors human experience, movement, struggle, transformation, survival. It is small, but its narrative is expansive. As we approach the final arc of this documentary, one truth becomes clear. The ukulele did not conquer the world loudly. It did not dominate charts continuously. It did not overpower orchestras. It moved quietly, through docks, through royal courts, through classrooms, through bedrooms, through screens. It slipped into lives gently. And perhaps that gentle approach is why it lasted. Instruments that demand attention may fade when attention shifts. Instruments that invite participation endure. The ukulele invites, and that invitation remains open. We are nearing the closing chapters of this journey, but before we conclude, we need to explore one final dimension. Not history, not psychology, not economics, but philosophy. What does the ukulele teach us about music itself, about simplicity, about resilience, about joy? What if the ukulele's greatest lesson has nothing to do with music? What if its real significance lies in what it reveals about human nature? Consider its journey again. It was not invented by kings or empires. It was carried by migrants, workers seeking opportunity across the ocean. It was adopted by a kingdom trying to preserve identity under pressure. It was commercialized by industrial America. It was reshaped by post-war manufacturing. It was revived by a Hawaiian singer in the middle of the night. It was amplified by teenagers holding webcams. At every stage, ordinary people shaped its destiny. Not institutions, not corporations alone, people. And that tells us something powerful. Cultural survival is rarely orchestrated from above. It grows from participation. The ukulele survived not because it was loud, but because it was playable. That distinction matters. Many instruments require years of discipline before sounding good. The ukulele offers beauty almost immediately, and that early beauty encourages continuation. There's a philosophy hidden there. Small wins sustain long journeys. When someone learns their first chord, maybe just C major, and hears a recognizable sound, something shifts. It's not virtuosity, it's possibility. And possibility is addictive. The ukulele thrives because it gives possibility quickly. In a world increasingly defined by delayed gratification, long degrees, complex software, difficult entry barriers, an instrument that rewards beginners within days feels radical. It says, you can do this, now, today, without permission, and that invitation may be its deepest cultural impact. But there's another philosophical layer: resilience through adaptation. The ukulele has never remained static. Portuguese machete became Hawaiian ukulele. Soprano expanded into concert, tenor, baritone. Solid wood expanded into plastic. Acoustic expanded into electric. Traditional strumming expanded into percussive fingerstyle. Each era added something without erasing what came before. That layered evolution mirrors healthy culture. Preserve core, adapt form. Move forward without forgetting origin. And the ukulele's physical design reinforces that philosophy. 4 strings, that's constraint. Constraint forces creativity. Jazz players discover alternate voicings. Classical arrangers reimagine compositions. Singer-songwriters focus on melody and lyric. With fewer strings, you cannot hide behind complexity. You must make choices. And choice is where artistry lives. There's also humility embedded in the instrument. It rarely dominates an ensemble. It blends, supports, accents. Even when played solo, it feels intimate rather than grandiose. Humility is not weakness, it is restraint, and restraint allows connection. In performance, a ukulele player often stands close to the audience. The sound doesn't overwhelm, it invites listening. That dynamic shifts performance culture subtly. It favors presence over spectacle, and in an era where spectacle often overshadows substance, that difference matters. Now think about how often the ukulele appears during transitional life moments. First instruments in childhood, campfire songs in adolescence, wedding ceremonies, travel memories, quiet nights alone. It's not usually the instrument of confrontation. It's the instrument of reflection, and reflection shapes identity. Its tonal brightness may explain its association with hope. But hope is not naive. Hope is resilience in gentle form. The ukulele embodies that. It has been dismissed repeatedly, called a toy, called simplistic, called a fad. And yet it returns, not aggressively, but persistently. There is strength in persistence. In 1879, when João Fernandes reportedly played his small instrument stepping off the Ravenscrag, he likely had no idea he was initiating a cultural ripple that would last nearly 150 years. He was simply playing. That act, playing, is fundamental. Before industries, before branding, before global distribution, there was play. Music begins with play. Children bang on tables. Humans hum absent-mindedly. Rhythm emerges naturally. The ukulele preserves that playful origin. It feels like an invitation to experiment, not to perform flawlessly, but to explore. And exploration sustains culture. Now consider the broader timeline of instruments. The violin evolved over centuries but remained tied largely to formal performance traditions. The piano became central to Western composition but often required structured training. The electric guitar reshaped global youth culture but carried specific genre associations. The ukulele moved more freely. It slipped between contexts, folk and pop, classroom and concert hall, tradition and internet meme. Few instruments travel so fluidly across seriousness and silliness without losing integrity. That flexibility may be its secret, and that brings us to an even bigger idea. The ukulele's story challenges our assumptions about scale. We often equate impact with size, large orchestras, massive festivals, towering amplifiers. But here is an instrument barely 2 feet long that has influenced classrooms, festivals, film soundtracks, online culture, and global music education. Impact is not proportional to size. It is proportional to participation. And participation is the ukulele's domain. We are now approaching the final stretch of this 20,000-word journey. We've explored its migration, monarchy, commercialization, collapse, revival, globalization, psychology, economics, philosophy. But before we close, we must bring everything together. Because the ukulele is not just history, it is present tense. It is still being played somewhere right now, in a small apartment, on a balcony, in a classroom, on a beach, in a hospital therapy session, on a live stream, 4 strings vibrating, hands moving, someone smiling, and that smile may be the clearest summary of its legacy. But there is one final chapter left, the future. Not speculative fantasy, but grounded projection. What happens when tradition meets artificial intelligence, when sustainability meets demand, when global culture accelerates even further? As we look toward the future of the ukulele, it becomes clear that its next chapter will not be defined by a single breakthrough moment, viral video, or celebrity endorsement, but rather by the same quiet forces that carried it across the last century and a half: adaptability, accessibility, and emotional resonance. The world in which the ukulele now exists is radically different from the one that greeted João Fernandes on the docks of Honolulu in 1879, yet the instrument's core appeal remains remarkably intact. That continuity, in the face of relentless technological acceleration, is not accidental. It reflects something fundamental about how humans relate to sound, to objects, and to each other. Artificial intelligence is now capable of composing songs in seconds, generating realistic instrument tones, and even simulating strumming patterns that resemble human performance. Digital plugins can reproduce the timbre of a ukulele with surprising accuracy, layering artificial resonance and room ambiance over algorithmically generated chords. From a purely sonic standpoint, the physical instrument could theoretically be replaced in many commercial contexts, and yet the replacement does not occur in practice because music is not merely about the sound that reaches the ear. It is also about the gesture that produces it, the physicality of movement, the visible act of creation that anchors sound to a body. The ukulele, perhaps more than most instruments, embodies that visible connection between movement and music. When someone strums it, the motion is clear and readable even to a non-musician. The left hand shapes simple, recognizable chord forms, and the right hand produces rhythm in a way that feels almost conversational. There is no illusion of hidden machinery or digital processing. What you see is what you hear. In an era increasingly shaped by invisible code and abstract systems, the transparency carries cultural value. It reassures us that creation can still be tactile, comprehensible, and human. At the same time, the ukulele is not isolated from innovation. Modern luthiers are experimenting with sustainable materials that respond to environmental concerns surrounding traditional tonewoods like koa. Bamboo, reclaimed timber, and alternative hardwoods are increasingly used to reduce ecological strain while maintaining tonal character. Carbon fiber models, once dismissed as novelties, now offer weather-resistant options for traveling musicians and outdoor performers. Pickup systems have become more refined, allowing subtle amplification without sacrificing the instrument's natural warmth. These evolutions demonstrate that tradition and innovation are not opposites, they are collaborators. The educational landscape also continues to shape the instrument's trajectory. As schools navigate budget constraints and curricular shifts, the ukulele remains an efficient entry point for teaching harmony, rhythm, and ensemble playing. Its chord-based structure introduces students to harmonic progressions quickly, enabling them to understand song architecture in a way that is immediately practical. In many classrooms, it functions as both an instrument and a teaching framework, allowing educators to explain transposition, key relationships, and song form through direct experience rather than abstract theory. That pedagogical flexibility ensures its continued presence in formal education, which in turn feeds community participation beyond school walls. Culturally, the instrument's future may depend less on mainstream chart success and more on distributed creativity. The Internet has fragmented musical authority, dissolving the dominance of centralized gatekeepers and empowering niche communities. In this environment, the ukulele thrives because it aligns naturally with grassroots expression. It does not require institutional endorsement to flourish. It requires only individuals willing to play. As long as online platforms continue to facilitate small-scale sharing, the ukulele will likely remain embedded in personal storytelling spaces, whether through live-streamed performances, collaborative duets, or short-form video formats that reward immediacy and sincerity. There is also the question of genre evolution. While the ukulele has historically been associated with folk, pop, and Hawaiian music, contemporary artists increasingly integrate it into unexpected contexts. Producers sample ukulele textures within electronic compositions, blending organic strums with synthetic beats. Experimental musicians process its sound through pedals and digital effects, stretching its tonal palette into ambient or even industrial territories. These expansions challenge the stereotype that the ukulele belongs exclusively to cheerful or light-hearted aesthetics. They demonstrate that its tonal character, though bright, is not confined to a single emotional register. However, perhaps the most compelling aspect of the ukulele's future lies not in technological adaptation or genre expansion, but in cultural continuity. In Hawaii, efforts to contextualize the instrument within its historical roots continue to grow stronger. Workshops increasingly emphasize not only technique, but also lineage, ensuring that new generations understand the role of the ukulele in broader narratives of monarchy, annexation, and cultural preservation. This integration of history and practice anchors the instrument's global spread within a respectful framework, reminding players that participation carries responsibility as well as pleasure. Globally, the ukulele may continue serving as a bridge between cultures, precisely because of its unassuming scale. Large instruments often dominate space and demand attention. The ukulele invites collaboration instead. In multicultural festivals, community gatherings, and cross-border exchanges, its sound blends rather than overpowers. That blending capacity makes it particularly suited to an interconnected world in which collaboration is increasingly valued over competition. As we project forward, it becomes clear that the ukulele's endurance does not hinge on novelty. It hinges on familiarity. It has embedded itself into everyday rituals, bedroom songwriting, classroom lessons, travel memories, therapeutic sessions, and those rituals renew its relevance continuously. Unlike instruments tied to specific technological eras, it does not depend on amplification trends or production aesthetics. It depends on hands, on breath, on proximity. 50 years from now, the music industry may look radically different. Distribution platforms may evolve beyond recognition, and virtual performance spaces may become commonplace. Yet it is difficult to imagine a future in which the tactile pleasure of strumming a wooden instrument disappears entirely. The ukulele's small scale may even enhance its durability in a world facing environmental and spatial constraints, where portability and sustainability gain importance. In the end, the future of the ukulele appears less like a dramatic reinvention and more like a steady continuation of its historical pattern. It will adapt where necessary, absorb new influences, and migrate alongside people as they move through changing landscapes. It will likely experience cycles of heightened visibility and quieter periods, as it always has. But those cycles do not threaten its existence. They define it. The instrument that began as a migrant's companion has become a global citizen, and global citizens do not vanish easily. They evolve, integrate, and persist. The ukulele's story has never been about domination. It has been about presence. And presence, unlike trend, is not easily erased. In the next section, we will bring together the threads of migration, adaptation, psychology, and philosophy to understand not only where the ukulele has been, but what it ultimately represents in the broader history of music. If we strip away every date, every manufacturing boom, every viral video, and every festival, what remains at the center of the ukulele's story is not commerce, nor technology, nor even genre. What remains is human scale. The ukulele survives because it fits the human body and the human life with unusual precision. It rests comfortably against the chest. It does not strain the shoulders. It does not demand extraordinary finger strength. And it does not overwhelm the voice. It is proportioned to the everyday person. That proportional harmony between instrument and body has quietly shaped its entire destiny. Across history, the instruments that endure are often those that align naturally with domestic life. The piano became central in the 19th century because it anchored the living room. The acoustic guitar thrived because it could travel from porch to campfire. The ukulele carved its space by fitting even smaller environments: urban apartments, student dormitories, classroom shelves, carry-on luggage bins. Its modest dimensions made it compatible with the shrinking physical spaces of modern living. As cities densified and living rooms became smaller, the instrument that required less space gained silent advantage. There is also a social dimension to this scale. But large instruments often establish hierarchy. The concert grand piano dominates a room. The drum kit commands visual authority. Even a full-sized guitar can create distance between performer and audience. The ukulele, by contrast, narrows that distance. It invites listeners closer. When someone performs with it, the atmosphere rarely becomes confrontational or grandiose. Instead, it leans toward intimacy. That intimacy has shaped not only its sound, but the behavior surrounding it. Ukulele gatherings often emphasize collective singing over individual virtuosity, reinforcing the idea that music is something shared rather than displayed. Yet intimacy should not be mistaken for limitation. One of the instrument's quiet revolutions has been its ability to hold emotional depth without theatrical excess. Israel Kamakawiwo'ole's late-night recording session demonstrated this power vividly. The arrangement was sparse, the production minimal, and the instrumentation limited, but the emotional impact proved global. The ukulele did not need orchestral reinforcement to carry weight. Its restraint amplified vulnerability. That dynamic has echoed through countless bedroom recordings and small stage performances since then, where artists discovered that minimal accompaniment often enhances lyrical clarity. This relationship between minimalism and sincerity is particularly relevant in an era saturated with content. The modern listener navigates a flood of polished productions, layered harmonies, and digitally perfected vocals. Against that backdrop, the ukulele offers contrast. Its sound often signals authenticity before a single lyric is sung, and listeners subconsciously associate it with informality and directness, and that association grants performers immediate emotional access. In other words, the instrument carries semiotic meaning. It communicates tone even before melody unfolds. At the same time, the ukulele's history reminds us that authenticity is not static. It has repeatedly absorbed outside influence while maintaining core identity. Portuguese craftsmanship, Hawaiian cultural revival, American industrial scaling, Japanese precision engineering, and internet-driven global communities have all left fingerprints on its evolution. Rather than diluting its essence, these influences layered complexity into its narrative. It stands as an example of how cultural objects can migrate and transform without dissolving entirely. The instrument's identity is neither purely Portuguese, nor purely Hawaiian, nor purely American. It is a living composite shaped by movement. Movement is perhaps the defining theme of its existence. It crossed oceans in the hands of immigrants. It crossed political regimes as Hawaii transitioned from kingdom to territory. It crossed economic upheavals during the Great Depression and post-war industrialization. It crossed technological revolutions from radio to streaming. And it crossed generational boundaries, repeatedly rediscovered by new age groups who believed they were encountering something fresh. That cyclical rediscovery gives the ukulele a paradoxical quality. It feels timeless and contemporary at once. There is also a subtle democratic impulse embedded in its accessibility. When barriers to participation are low, communities widen. The ukulele's affordability has historically allowed people from varied socioeconomic backgrounds to engage in music making. That inclusivity shapes culture at the grassroots level. It ensures that music is not restricted to those with institutional access or financial resources. In classrooms, the instrument often becomes a first step toward understanding harmony and rhythm. In retirement communities, it becomes a second chance at creative expression. In online communities, it becomes a shared language between strangers separated by geography but united by chords. The instrument's survival also reveals something about human attention. Loud innovations often dominate headlines, but quiet continuities build endurance. The ukulele did not compete with electric guitars on volume. It did not rival synthesizers in sonic range. Instead, it occupied spaces those instruments did not seek. It thrived in corners of domestic life, in therapeutic settings, in small gatherings, and in digital frames that favored compact visuals. Its growth was rarely explosive for long stretches, but it was persistent. Persistence, more than spectacle, secured its place. As we move closer to concluding this long exploration, it becomes evident that the ukulele's story is less about conquest and more about coexistence. It coexists with larger instruments without challenging them directly. It coexists with digital production without resisting it. It coexists with cultural heritage while inviting new interpretations. This capacity to share space rather than dominate it may be the reason it remains welcome across diverse contexts. The future will undoubtedly introduce further shifts in technology, pedagogy, and taste, but the underlying qualities that carried the ukulele across nearly a century and a half are unlikely to vanish. Its manageable scale, harmonic clarity, emotional warmth, and social flexibility provide structural stability. These characteristics are not trend-dependent, they are embedded in the instrument's design. Ultimately, the ukulele teaches a broader lesson about creative endurance. Cultural artifacts that remain open to adaptation, open to participation, open to reinterpretation, are the ones that survive systemic change. Those that rigidly defend a single identity often fracture under pressure. The ukulele's history demonstrates that flexibility can be a form of strength and that smallness can be strategic rather than marginal. Now, we will bring together the threads of migration, community, technology, and philosophy into a closing reflection on what the ukulele ultimately symbolizes in the broader story of human music making. If the ukulele's story were reduced to a single word, it might be continuity, not dominance, not revolution, not disruption, continuity. Across nearly 150 years, the world has changed almost beyond recognition. Empires dissolved, borders shifted, technologies emerged that would have seemed indistinguishable from magic in the 19th century. Music itself transformed repeatedly, from acoustic halls to radio waves, from vinyl to streaming, from human orchestras to algorithmic composition. And through all of it, this small, four-stringed instrument continued to pass from hand to hand. Continuity does not mean stagnation. The ukulele did not freeze in 1879 and resist change. It evolved, but it evolved without severing its lineage. That distinction matters. Many cultural objects either calcify into museum pieces or dissolve into trend cycles. The ukulele did neither. It remained usable. Usability is an underrated force in cultural survival. The instrument never became so ornate that it intimidated beginners, nor so technologically complex that it required specialized infrastructure. It remained graspable. You could understand it at a glance. 4 strings, frets clearly marked, sound hole centered. There is almost no mystery to its mechanics. That transparency makes it teachable, and teachability ensures replication. Replication sustains tradition. Every time a parent shows a child how to place a finger on the 3rd fret of the A string to form a C chord, the instrument's history extends forward. That moment may seem insignificant, but multiplied across millions of households and classrooms, it becomes generational momentum. Culture rarely survives through grand monuments alone. It survives through repeated small acts. The ukulele is built for small acts. It does not require a formal stage. It does not require amplification. It does not demand a conductor or ensemble. One person can carry it, sit anywhere, and begin. In that sense, it preserves one of the oldest forms of music making, solitary expression that can become communal at any moment. A single strummer can become 2, then 5, then 50, without logistical complexity. That scalability is subtle but powerful. There is also something deeply symbolic in its tonal character. The ukulele's brightness is not shrill, it is rounded. Its sustain is not long, but it is clear. Chords decay quickly, leaving space between strokes. That sonic breathing room mirrors conversational rhythm. When people sing with ukulele, it often feels like storytelling rather than performance. The instrument supports narrative. It does not overshadow it. Storytelling may be its most enduring partnership. From Hawaiian mele to indie bedroom confessions, from classroom sing-alongs to wedding vows, the ukulele often accompanies words. It frames language without competing for attention. In doing so, it reinforces a fundamental human impulse to narrate experience. Instruments that amplify narrative rather than eclipse it tend to integrate deeply into culture. But continuity also requires resilience against dismissal. Throughout its history, the ukulele has been underestimated. It was once treated as a novelty import. Later, it was dismissed as a toy. During the electric guitar boom, it was considered outdated. In the early Internet era, it was sometimes mocked as overly sweet or simplistic. Each time, it absorbed criticism and persisted. Why? Because it did not depend on elite validation. Its core audience has rarely been gatekeepers or critics. It has been families, students, hobbyists, independent creators. That distributed base insulates it from the volatility of critical opinion. Even if mainstream attention fades, grassroots engagement continues quietly. This distributed survival model is particularly relevant in today's cultural landscape. Algorithms may amplify certain trends temporarily, but decentralized participation sustains long-term presence. The ukulele's global communities, festival networks, online tutorial channels, local clubs, function as interconnected nodes rather than a single hierarchy. When one node quiets, another thrives. And then there is geography. Few instruments can claim such fluid movement across continents without losing identity. Portuguese origins did not prevent Hawaiian transformation. Hawaiian identity did not prevent American industrialization. American commercialization did not prevent Japanese refinement. Japanese enthusiasm did not prevent European orchestral experimentation. Each region contributed something distinct without erasing prior layers. This layering suggests that the ukulele's identity is cumulative rather than competitive. It does not ask one culture to surrender its claim so another can assert ownership. Instead, it becomes shared territory shaped by context. That capacity for shared ownership may be one of its most important lessons in an era increasingly sensitive to cultural exchange and preservation. Yet the instrument's future will not depend solely on history or philosophy. It will depend on whether people continue to find personal meaning in it. Meaning is what converts object into symbol. When someone writes their first song on a ukulele, it ceases to be merely an instrument. It becomes a vessel for memory. When a family sings together around it, it becomes part of shared narrative. These micro-histories accumulate into macro-continuity. As technological landscapes shift further, perhaps toward immersive virtual environments or AI-assisted composition, the tactile authenticity of acoustic instruments may gain renewed value. Already, there is evidence that as digital production becomes more seamless, audiences crave imperfections that signal humanity. The faint buzz of a slightly imperfect fret, the unevenness of a strumming pattern, the breath before a lyric. These details communicate presence. The ukulele's simplicity makes those human markers audible. Its design does not conceal flaws easily, but that transparency becomes strength. Perfection is not the goal, connection is, and connection thrives on subtle imperfection. If the next century introduces entirely new forms of musical interaction, it is likely that the ukulele will adapt again, perhaps as a hybrid instrument integrated with new technologies, or as a consciously analog refuge within increasingly virtual environments. Either role would align with its history. It has always found space in transitional eras, and that may be the most profound insight of all. The ukulele has flourished not during stable, unchanging periods, but during transitions, migration waves, political shifts, technological revolutions, digital democratization. It is an instrument of thresholds. It appears when cultures are redefining themselves, when people are searching for new ways to connect, when simplicity becomes valuable amid complexity. The story has moved from dockside performance to royal courts, from industrial factories to internet platforms, from classroom racks to global festivals. What remains is to draw these threads together into a final reflection on what this small instrument ultimately represents in the broader arc of human creativity. When historians look back at cultural objects, they often search for moments of invention, the spark, the breakthrough, the defining event that changed everything. But the ukulele resists that kind of clean origin story. It was not born from a single act of genius or a revolutionary patent. It emerged from migration, adaptation, and circumstance. It was shaped by hands rather than declarations. And perhaps that is why its story feels less like a straight line and more like a tide, advancing, retreating, reshaping the shoreline without ever fully disappearing. The tide metaphor is fitting because the ukulele has always lived close to water. It crossed the Atlantic with Portuguese migrants from Madeira. It anchored itself in the Hawaiian Islands, surrounded by the Pacific. It traveled back across oceans through exhibitions and tours. It spread again through global shipping networks during the industrial era. Even its sound, bright, rhythmic, buoyant, often evokes imagery of coastline and horizon. Whether consciously or not, listeners frequently associate it with openness. Openness is central to its endurance. The ukulele does not guard its boundaries tightly. It invites beginners without humiliation. It welcomes reinterpretation without resistance. It allows itself to be played imperfectly. That openness has shaped the culture surrounding it. In ukulele gatherings around the world, there is often an absence of competitive tension that marks other musical spaces. The atmosphere tends toward collective participation rather than technical hierarchy. Virtuosos exist, certainly, but they coexist with novices comfortably. This coexistence reflects something deeper about the instrument's philosophy. It does not demand mastery before offering beauty. That characteristic subtly reshapes how people relate to music. Instead of positioning music as something to be perfected before it can be shared, the ukulele allows sharing from the beginning. A player with 3 chords can accompany dozens of songs. A group of beginners can produce harmony on their first day together. That immediacy lowers social barriers. In a world increasingly fragmented by specialization, that accessibility matters. Specialization drives innovation, but it can also isolate. The ukulele counters isolation with participation. It thrives in community centers, classrooms, parks, and online forums precisely because it reduces the fear of inadequacy. The instrument's physical modesty signals that one does not need to be extraordinary to belong. Yet modesty should not be confused with insignificance. Historically, modest tools have often reshaped culture more profoundly than monumental ones. The printing press democratized information not because it was ornate, but because it was replicable. The smartphone reshaped communication not because it was large, but because it was portable. The ukulele democratized harmony for millions because it was graspable, and harmony, once understood, changes listening forever. When someone learns to form a C chord and then shifts to G, they are not merely memorizing shapes. They are internalizing relationships between tones. They begin to hear structure in songs they previously experienced as undifferentiated sound. That cognitive shift deepens engagement with music as a whole. The ukulele, by simplifying entry into harmonic thinking, expands musical literacy quietly. There is also something poetic about its scale in a century obsessed with amplification. The 20th century celebrated volume, louder concerts, larger venues, bigger speakers. The electric guitar symbolized rebellion through decibel power. The synthesizer symbolized futurism through sonic expansion. Amid that escalation, the ukulele remained small. It did not compete for loudness, it occupied intimacy. It suggested that not all cultural impact requires magnitude. This refusal to compete on volume may be why it survived the electric revolution. It did not attempt to become something it was not. Instead of chasing amplification dominance, it deepened its presence in spaces where quietness was valued. That strategic humility preserved it. As we consider its symbolism today, the ukulele begins to resemble more than an instrument. It resembles an idea that creativity does not require grand scale, that participation can matter more than performance, and that resilience often appears gentle rather than forceful. Even the name carries narrative tension. Ukulele, commonly translated as jumping flea, captures motion rather than mass. It evokes quickness, agility, playfulness. Whether the translation is literal or folkloric, the imagery fits. The instrument moves quickly between contexts. It adapts lightly. It lands, leaves, and returns. The modern world continues accelerating. Digital platforms compress attention spans. But artificial intelligence challenges notions of authorship. Virtual environments blur lines between physical and simulated experience. In this landscape, the ukulele's analog presence offers grounding. It requires fingers, not code. It responds to pressure, not programming. It vibrates through wood, not circuits. And yet it does not reject the digital world. It coexists within it, appearing in live streams, tutorials, and recordings. It inhabits both tactile and virtual space without losing integrity. That dual citizenship may ensure its relevance as technology evolves. As we approach the final chapters of this journey, one truth becomes increasingly clear. The ukulele's greatest achievement is not fame, nor sales numbers, nor viral moments. Its greatest achievement is continuity through participation. It has woven itself into ordinary lives so thoroughly that its presence feels natural rather than remarkable. But perhaps that ordinariness is remarkable. An object that moves from dockside curiosity to royal court, from mass production to cultural revival, from classroom staple to global internet phenomenon without losing recognizability, is rare. The ukulele's silhouette today would be familiar to someone living in 1915. Its tuning would be recognizable to a player from 1955. That consistency across eras anchors it in time. There is something quietly radical about an instrument that refuses to disappear, not because it dominates charts year after year, not because it commands the largest stages, not because it evolves into increasingly complex machinery, but because it remains useful. The ukulele has never relied on spectacle for survival. Instead, it has embedded itself into ordinary life so thoroughly that removing it would leave subtle but meaningful gaps. It appears in classrooms where children first understand what a chord is. It appears in living rooms where families sing together without worrying about perfection. It appears in moments of solitude when someone reaches for a simple instrument to translate emotion into vibration. And that translation, from feeling into sound, is the true thread connecting every chapter of its history. When Portuguese migrants carried small stringed instruments across the Atlantic, they were not launching a global movement, they were carrying fragments of home. When Hawaiian royalty embraced the instrument, they were not chasing novelty. They were reinforcing identity at a time of cultural uncertainty. When American factories mass-produced plastic models in the 1950s, they were responding to demand from households eager for accessible music. When Israel Kamakawiwo'ole recorded his late-night session, he was not engineering a resurgence. He was expressing something deeply personal. In every era, the ukulele has served expression before ambition. That order matters. Ambition often seeks visibility first and meaning later. The ukulele's history reverses that sequence. Meaning came first, in migration, in community, in storytelling, and visibility followed. Even its viral moments were rooted in sincerity rather than calculated spectacle. That sincerity gives the instrument unusual durability in a culture often driven by trend cycles. It is also worth considering how rarely the ukulele provokes hostility. Few instruments carry such low cultural threat. It does not symbolize rebellion in a way that alarms authority. It does not demand exclusivity that alienates beginners. It does not assert dominance that overshadows collaborators. Instead, it enters spaces gently. That gentleness may be why it crosses generational and geographic boundaries so easily. Grandparents and grandchildren can share it without tension. Professional musicians and hobbyists can sit side by side without hierarchy dominating the room. The instrument's scale neutralizes ego. It is difficult to posture aggressively while holding something so small and warm-toned. That physical reality shapes social interaction. In this way, the ukulele subtly influences behavior. It lowers performative intensity. It shifts attention toward shared rhythm rather than technical exhibition. In group settings, strumming patterns synchronize bodies and breathing. There is measurable neurological evidence that collective rhythm strengthens social bonding. The ukulele, by simplifying entry into group music making, increases the likelihood of those bonding experiences. Its impact, then, is not only musical but social. We often measure cultural significance by commercial metrics, sales numbers, chart positions, streaming counts. But cultural depth can also be measured by integration. How deeply is an object woven into daily rituals? How often does it appear in formative memories? How widely is it used without fanfare? By those measures, the ukulele's influence is profound. It exists in millions of photographs taken casually at beaches, parks, and family gatherings. It hangs on walls as both instrument and decoration. It travels on airplanes tucked into overhead bins. It appears in songs that mark weddings, graduations, and quiet evenings. It may not dominate global industry statistics at every moment, but it occupies intimate territory. And intimate territory endures. As technology continues reshaping how music is produced and consumed, one pattern becomes clear. The more abstract sound becomes, the more some people crave tangible connection. Virtual instruments can simulate timbre convincingly, but they cannot simulate the sensation of wood vibrating against the sternum. They cannot replicate the subtle coordination between left-hand chord changes and right-hand strums in real time. They cannot duplicate the social dynamics of multiple people adjusting tempo together organically. The ukulele embodies that tangible coordination. It remains stubbornly physical. That physicality may become even more valuable as digital mediation increases. Just as handwritten letters gained sentimental value in the age of instant messaging, acoustic instruments gain symbolic weight in the era of infinite digital sound. The ukulele, because of its accessibility, stands at the forefront of that tactile resistance, not as an act of rebellion, but as a continuation of embodied creativity. Looking back across its nearly 150-year journey, one sees not a linear ascent, but a series of waves. Popularity surged, receded, surged again. Each wave left residue, new players, new songs, and new communities that persisted even when mainstream attention shifted elsewhere. That residue forms a stable foundation. The instrument does not rely on a single era to justify its existence. It accumulates eras. This accumulation suggests that its future will likely resemble its past. Periods of heightened visibility interwoven with quieter seasons of grassroots continuity. It will appear in new genres unexpectedly. It will be rediscovered by generations who believe they have found something uniquely theirs. It will adapt subtly to materials and technology while retaining recognizable shape and tuning. Most importantly, it will continue to function as a bridge between cultures, between skill levels, between solitude and community, and that may be its most enduring role. As we move into the final chapters, the question shifts from how the ukulele survived to what it ultimately represents. Beyond wood and strings, beyond migration and manufacturing, beyond viral videos and festivals, what does this small instrument tell us about the human impulse to make music? If you were to place a ukulele on a table in front of someone who had never seen one before, they would likely smile before they even heard it played. The shape is rounded and unintimidating. The proportions feel balanced, almost playful. It does not resemble a machine. It resembles something made to be held. That first reaction, before a single note sounds, reveals something essential about its cultural position. The ukulele disarms. Throughout its history, it has entered spaces not as an intruder, but as a guest. It arrived in Hawaii not as a symbol of conquest, but as a migrant's instrument. It entered American homes not as elite art, but as affordable recreation. It reappeared in the digital age not through corporate campaigns, but through individuals sharing songs from bedrooms and park benches. It rarely demands attention. It earns it quietly. And that quiet earning of attention reflects a broader truth about creativity. The most enduring forms of art are not always the most dramatic. They are often the most repeatable. The ukulele is repeatable. It can be learned, taught, borrowed, passed down, replicated. It does not rely on rare materials or rare skill sets to survive. It relies on ordinary hands. That ordinariness is its strength. Instruments that require exceptional mastery before sounding pleasant can create distance between performer and audience. The ukulele collapses that distance. When someone strums a simple progression, listeners often feel they could do the same. That feeling, "I could try this," is powerful. It shifts music from spectacle to participation. Participation changes culture. When people participate in music rather than merely consume it, their relationship to sound deepens. They understand rhythm physically. They feel chord changes in their fingers. They internalize tempo, not as abstract timing, but as shared pulse. The ukulele has invited millions into that participatory relationship with music who might otherwise have remained spectators. It has also gently challenged assumptions about seriousness in art. For decades, critics dismissed it as lightweight. Yet seriousness is not determined by size or string count. Emotional gravity can be carried by the smallest instrument if the intention behind it is genuine. Israel Kamakawiwo Ole proved that to a global audience. So did countless independent artists who wrote vulnerable songs with nothing more than 4 strings and a quiet room. The ukulele demonstrates that emotional weight does not require sonic density. It requires honesty. There is something philosophically resonant in that idea. In a world that often equates impact with volume and scale, the ukulele stands as evidence that subtlety can endure. It does not attempt to outcompete larger instruments in range or projection. It occupies its register fully and confidently. It embraces its brightness rather than apologizing for its lack of bass. It understands its design and works within it. There is wisdom in working within design. Human beings, too, operate within constraints: time, space, resources. The ukulele's 4 strings are a reminder that limitation does not preclude expression. On the contrary, limitation can clarify intention. With fewer notes available at once, harmonic choices become deliberate. Space becomes part of the composition. Silence becomes structural. This philosophy of deliberate simplicity may be part of why the instrument continues resonating in an increasingly complex era. As digital tools multiply possibilities endlessly, creative paralysis can follow. Infinite options can dilute focus. The ukulele reduces options. It narrows the field just enough to encourage decision-making. It invites you to choose a chord and begin. And beginning is everything. Across its history, the ukulele has been the beginning instrument for millions. The first chord, the first song, the first time someone realized they could accompany their own voice. That initiation experience imprints deeply. Even those who later moved to guitar, piano, or other instruments often remember the ukulele as the doorway. Doorways are not destinations, but they are essential. And yet, for many, the ukulele is not merely a doorway. It becomes a lifelong companion. Its portability allows it to travel across life stages: college dorms, first apartments, family homes, retirement communities. It ages alongside its player. Wood darkens. Finish wears slightly at the edges. Small scratches accumulate, each marking a moment of use rather than neglect. Those marks tell stories. The ukulele accumulates narrative physically as well as culturally. When we look back across nearly a century and a half, what stands out most is not any single boom or celebrity endorsement. It is the consistency of presence. Even during periods when mainstream attention faded, the instrument never vanished entirely. It retreated into communities and waited. It persisted in classrooms and living rooms. It remained accessible. Accessibility is perhaps its most radical trait. In a world stratified by economic and educational divides, the ukulele has offered creative agency at relatively low cost. That democratization of sound-making matters historically. It widens the circle of who gets to create rather than merely observe. And when circles widen, culture becomes richer. We are now standing at the edge of the story, looking back across oceans and decades. Portuguese sailors, Hawaiian monarchs, American factory lines, post-war classrooms, Japanese workshops, bedroom live streams, festival crowds strumming in unison, each moment distinct, each moment connected by 4 strings tuned G, C, E, A. The journey is not linear, it is layered, and in that layering we find the instrument's true identity. Not as novelty, not as fad, not as relic, but as participant in human continuity. If you stand at the shoreline in Honolulu today and listen carefully, you may hear something faint beneath the wind and waves. Not literally, but historically. The sound of hands strumming, the echo of dockside strings from 1879, the rhythm of royal gatherings, the pulse of classroom lessons, the soft recording made in the middle of the night, the quiet bedroom covers uploaded across continents, all of it layered into a single cultural memory carried by 4 strings. And the ukulele's story is not the story of conquest. It is not the story of domination or disruption. It is the story of endurance through gentleness. It began in migration. Portuguese workers carried small stringed instruments across the Atlantic in search of opportunity. They did not know they were planting the seed of a global movement. They were preserving familiarity in unfamiliar land. In Hawaii, that instrument was reshaped, renamed, and embraced, not as replacement, but as addition. It became woven into mele and hula, into community and court. It absorbed island identity without erasing its origin. Then the world accelerated. Political upheaval, annexation, industrialization. The instrument traveled again, to world fairs, into factories, onto radio waves. It became fashionable, then faded, and then returned in plastic form in post-war classrooms. It survived because it could be replicated, because it could be afforded, because it could be taught. When the electric guitar roared across the 20th century, the ukulele did not try to compete in volume. It did not attempt to reinvent itself as something louder or heavier. It remained small, it waited in domestic spaces, it accompanied quiet voices. And when the world shifted again, when the internet dissolved the distance between creator and audience, it was ready. It thrived in bedrooms and webcams because it fit the frame. It resonated in a digital age because it remained tactile. It was rediscovered by generations who believed they had found something entirely new, unaware that they were stepping into a lineage stretching back nearly 150 years. Few instruments can claim that kind of cyclical renewal, but renewal alone does not explain its significance. What the ukulele ultimately represents is something larger than music. It represents participation. It reminds us that art does not belong exclusively to the virtuosic or the elite. It belongs to those willing to begin. With 4 strings and a handful of chords, someone can accompany their own voice, share a story, and feel the shift from consumer to creator. That shift alters identity. It says, I can make sound, I can shape rhythm, I can join. In an era defined by complexity, the ukulele insists on clarity. It does not overwhelm with options. It narrows the field just enough to encourage action. It proves that limitation is not the enemy of expression, but often its catalyst. With fewer strings, choices become intentional. With less volume, presence becomes intimate. With smaller scale, connection becomes closer. It also represents resilience without aggression. Throughout its history, it was underestimated repeatedly, called a toy, called a fad, called simplistic. Yet it persisted, not by shouting louder, but by remaining useful. It embedded itself into rituals of everyday life, into weddings and graduations, into classrooms and therapy sessions, into solo evenings and communal gatherings. It became ordinary, and ordinary is powerful, because what becomes ordinary becomes enduring. Now consider the world ahead. Artificial intelligence will continue shaping music. Virtual spaces will blur the line between performance and simulation. Technology will offer endless sonic possibilities, and yet, somewhere in that future, someone will still sit on a couch, place fingers on a fretboard, and strum a chord that vibrates through wood into bone. That vibration cannot be digitized completely. It is physical, immediate, human. The ukulele's legacy is not about scale or dominance. It is about proximity. It brings music close to the body. It keeps sound within reach. It invites people to participate rather than spectate. And perhaps that is its quiet revolution. In a world often driven by spectacle, it reminds us that joy can be small, that creativity can be simple, that community can form around shared rhythm rather than shared perfection. From a dock in Honolulu to screens across the globe, the ukulele has carried this lesson steadily. 4 strings, 1 body of wood, countless hands, countless stories. If history has proven anything, it is that instruments do not survive by being the loudest. They survive by being loved, and the ukulele, across continents and generations, continues to be loved. Not because it demands greatness, but because it makes greatness feel possible. And that may be the most powerful chord it has ever played.